special guests. We have two GBI agents. We have Asia and William. Asia is originally from Ohio. They went to Ohio University and graduated with a BS in forensic chemistry and cellular and molecular biology, which is amazing. They worked in R&D pharmaceuticals, then cancer and immunotherapy research before landing their job with the GBI as a forensic toxicologist in 2013. That's when I graduated high school, where they've been employed ever since. When they're not at work, they love going to rock concerts and spending time with their husband Wes and their three fur children, two Siamese cats, Saphira and Aragon, and their little mouse Taco, which I think of Tom and Jerry moments. William received their bachelor's degree here at UGA in biology. Then they moved to Boston and received a master's degree in biomedical forensic science from Boston University School of Medicine. When they moved back to Georgia, they began their career as a UGA police officer. While they were on the UGA PD, they joined the SWAT team. After 2 years, they left their current position. They left to start as a firearms specialist for the GBI headquarters in Decatur in 2017. At the beginning of this year, they returned back here to the UGA PD as a part-time officer, rejoined the SWAT team while staying in their current full-time position with the GBI. They live in Athens with their wife, who's in her second year here at pharmacy school, and they make the long-born commute to GBI headquarters 4 times a week. So let's give it up for our special guests. Hi everyone, my name is Asia. This is Will. So, just a quick introduction. We're here to talk about the CSI of Athens. And who here has seen a TV show relating to CSI? Yes, everyone. Okay, do you think that's cool? Yeah. Okay, so before you saw that TV show, did you know anything about what goes on with the things that are found at a crime scene? Some people maybe. Okay, but I think that the things these shows are good for is making awareness that when a crime happens and there's all this stuff, like there's broken glass and hair and blood and dead bodies and people puking and all that. But there's evidence, right? And the evidence doesn't just like tell you what happened. So the way that officers and all those people are knowing what's happened is by getting that evidence analyzed. And because of shows like that, you now know that there's science involved, and it's not just officers on the scene, it's not people just intuitively knowing what happened. There's no video evidence or photograph evidence. So I'm definitely grateful for those shows for that, but something we definitely wanted to highlight is that it's not exactly like on TV, which I'm sure is shocking to everybody. I know, right? Okay, but so we both work for the GBI, which is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. I work in Augusta and he works in Atlanta. So we're just going to go into a little bit of how CSI is involved with the GBI. So first of all, when it comes to who enforces the law, obviously police officers is maybe one of the first things you guys think of. There's also agents and people that work for the GBI. You can also go beyond that, federal level, right? And even less than that, I mean, security officers or people working, GSP or local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and they're the people on the ground. So if the crime happens or your house gets broken into or somebody gets shot or even just as minor as a DUI or something like that, those are the people who are reporting to that. Somebody called in, somebody saw something, and they're the boots on the ground that are showing up. But they are the true CSI. They are the crime scene investigators. They're at the scene, they're looking at what's there, they're trying to piece it together, documenting, photographing. And so, a lot of times people meet
me and I'm like, oh, I'm a forensic toxicologist. And they're like, oh, CSI. And I'm like, well, technically I'm a CLS, I'm a crime lab scientist, and a CSI is a crime scene investigator, but sure. So that's something I think a lot of people don't know that I think is important to translate, because there's different opportunities for the same interesting field. So that's what I like to call step one, is the boots on the ground. And any evidence they find at the scene, they collect and they send to us. And we're what I call step two. We're in the crime lab, and we are the ones looking at that evidence and analyzing it for hours and hours and days and weeks and months and longer than the state government wants us to. But then we write a report about what we got, and we give it back to step one so that they know what it is that they found. We help them understand what they found, because while some of you, I'm sure, are jack of every trade, a lot of people are not. So they're great at looking at crime scenes and trying to figure out what happened, but they don't know, they can't just look at this bullet and figure out what happened or where it was shot from, and they can't, sense from the blood spatter, what this person may have been on when they died or when they decided to shoot their best friend in the face. So that's why they give their evidence to us, and in the lab, we analyze it and give them a report back, and then it moves on to step three, which is the judicial portion. So a lot of times these cases are settled outside of court, and sometimes they're not. So any case that we work, we then are responsible for showing up to court for. Mind you, we handle the entire state of Georgia, so if there was a crime lab here in Athens, but the case that I was working was in somewhere really far away from here, I don't know, Waycross or Pierce County or somewhere on the Florida border, Valdosta, who knows? We have to drive there and testify on that case, and we always have to be on call. And it sounds kind of tedious, but it's fun. But I guess the point of that is that it's not just one person. It's not just the officers. It's not just us. It's not just lawyers and people in court. It's sort of a team effort when it comes to forensics. And I think that's something not a lot of people think about. We're all CSI. Okay, so specifically for the GBI, which is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, we have three divisions. We have the investigative division, which are our agents, and then we have the GCIC, which are handling all of the computer and cyber aspects of what we do. And then we have the Division of Forensic Sciences, which is how both Will and I are employed, and we are the state crime lab. As the map shows, there are 7 crime labs in the state of Georgia, so we're broken up into sections, so any crimes within that section would technically feed to that lab. However, in the case of toxicology, which is where I work, there are only 2 of those 7 labs that do toxicology, Augusta and then Atlanta. So we split the state in half on who gets our cases. And I don't know how many have firearms.
So we've got 3, one at headquarters, one at Savannah, and one at Columbus. So most of our work is in the metro Atlanta area, operations and all that. So anything from below Henry County all the way up to Tennessee and line border.
So yeah, not all the labs do all the things. So we split that up. And these are an example of a few of the different disciplines of science that we do. So, okay, on the top left that's for our chemistry department. It's hard drugs, so like kilos of cocaine and boxes of pot, and bags of pills, and they don't know what they are. That all goes to chemistry. Brownies, any kind of edibles, any kind of miscellaneous things, candles that people have made with hard drug evidence, that all goes to chemistry. Then next over on the right is biology. They handle everything DNA, any kind of bodily fluids of any sort that may be found at any kind of scene that they want to know whose it is, goes to biology. Of course, the bullet represents firearms, which I'll let Will talk about more in depth later because I wouldn't know what I'm saying. And then to the right of that is our medical examiner's office. They do pathology, so any autopsies that need to be done. They also handle you find like bones in the woods and you don't know if they're human, you don't know if they matter, you don't know whose they are, that is our pathology department. Then to the right of that would represent latent prints, so they handle looking for fingerprints on objects and also identifying and matching fingerprints. Then the very bottom left is our trace department, so they handle fibers, hairs, broken glass, they do paint chip. Like if there's a hit and run, they have this great quote that I can't quote directly, but something about everything in life, you always leave something and you always take something with you. It's like their motto. So it's great when it comes to car accidents because apparently both paints transfer to each car, so it's a great way to match up who was where. And then finally our impressions and tool marks discipline, which handles obviously like tire prints, footprints. And then the last one that's not pictured is mine, is toxicology. So we handle drugs, alcohols, poisons, toxins, inhalants in the body. So we handle both living and dead people, anything that can be in your system that can cause you to do something weird, that can cause you to die, that would be important to know if you were found somewhere on the side of the road. So that's the kind of things that we're looking for. So I spend my days mostly with blood and urine, and if people are dead, then we also work with vitreous fluid from the eye. We do spleen squeezings, we make blood milkshakes out of clotted blood. I'm sure everyone's really like drinking and enjoying food and beverage right now, so that's awesome to hear about gastric contents. Yeah, all of that we analyze, and we're just looking for whatever's there. And so my reports to the agents would be what was in that person's system. At the top are some tubes of blood that is actual evidence I have received. So what I do on a day-to-day basis doesn't exist. Like I don't do the same thing from day to day. I spend my time, like 30% of my time I'm in the lab. Like lab coat, goggles, gloves, doing the things that you see pictured on the bottom. We do a lot of chemical extractions to separate the physical matrices of blood or urine to remove the chemicals or drugs or toxins from that. And then I spend the rest of my time analyzing what it is. So, okay, when you're watching, these shows on TV, how long does it take for an answer?
30 seconds. One commercial
Yes,
break.
one commercial break and the whole crime solved. It's like a Christmas miracle. Okay, this is real life. This is a real sample of mine that took probably no less than 70-something days to solve because people do a lot of drugs. This particular woman had 26 different drugs in her system. If you can even name 26 drugs, I can guarantee that she took them. One of them was cocaine. And I know this looks very data heavy, but what you see at the very top, that is each different peak. Well, actually the bottom is cocaine. The bottom is actually cocaine's drug fingerprint. So that's just all of, just really quick. Whatever, the top left, that's actually cocaine's chemical structure. So that is chemical, that is cocaine on a chemical level. And the bottom right, the instrumentation we use literally blows everything up that's in the samples we do all day into tiny little pieces. So those are the tiny little pieces that cocaine breaks up into, and those pieces are what gives us all these spiky lines at the very bottom that make up cocaine's drug fingerprint. So it helps us to positively identify a drug. But the top, I'm sorry, yes.
What instrument was used to
This was gas chromatography mass spectrometry. Yeah. Yes. We love GCMS. Okay, so the top picture though, you can see like a bunch of peaks, right? Like there's a bunch of different like mountains, little skinny. Okay, so each one of those is a different drug. But what you don't see is along the bottom, like kind of looks like a flat line, except for when you keep zooming in and in and in and in, there are a billion like not a billion, there's probably hundreds of tiny little peaks that you can't physically see right now. But my job is to go through that straight line and look for every single little peak that's there and see if it's a drug or not. So this one sample takes about like 12 to 15 minutes to go through. And when I'm doing a run like this, there's about 57 cases on the run. So it takes a lot of time, yes.
You can't get it like a computer to go through all that stuff instead of manually?
So, are you familiar with like LCMS, like tandem master? Okay. So, for some things that we do, there's no way for me to put a blood sample in and it just spit back to me every drug that it finds. We do have some technology where the best it can do is give us some minor information, like basically numbers about a drug, but I still have to go through and see if it meets those parameters to positively identify it. So what I'm trying to get across with this data-heavy slide is that it's unfortunately not as easy in real life as it is on TV, but boy, do we wish it was. So, I know we have a really huge backlog, and do you guys ever hear about backlogs or, yeah, okay. I don't know how much of that gets out on like the news or whatever. Sometimes we hope it doesn't at all, but, sorry. Anyway, so it's things like this that are the reason that it takes so long. So also, we have to positively make sure we have 2 tests saying that the same drugs were there because we don't want to put out a report that has false information. So if we find THC in one place, we can't just say, oh yeah, they smoked pot. Like we have to find it at least one other place in order to say yes. And then somebody else has to completely go through all of our data to make sure it's right before our report goes out. So, yes, question?
What are some of the examples of the places you're talking about? Are you talking about like blood and something else, or?
No, so in some cases, if we have blood and urine, we will confirm if we find a drug in the blood, if it's present in the urine as well. This can be important for things like sexual assault cases because, let me back up. Typically, no, it's if we have blood, we have to have 2 positive tests in that same blood sample. We can't just have one and say for sure because people are human and while we don't typically ever, it's because of the GBI's processes of labeling and over-labeling everything, it's virtually impossible to mix up a sample, but if you have 2 tests that don't match, it seems pretty obvious that you have a problem. So if your multiple tests don't match, your report doesn't go out the door. But sometimes we will look for all of the drugs in 2 different matrices, like blood and urine, or vitreous fluid and gastric. Especially in the case of, it seems like sexual assault is kind of a hot topic right now, but a lot of people don't report it right away. And some drugs have a really short half-life, meaning they disappear in your bloodstream very quickly. So if I were to be assaulted right now and I thought I was drugged, but I was embarrassed and I didn't want to tell anybody and I didn't go until tomorrow and they drew my blood, whatever I could have been drugged with may not be there anymore. But what will be there are its metabolites. So when you have anything that you introduce into your system, food, drink, drugs, anything then your body is trying to change it to excrete it in urine usually. And so what we can also look for are those metabolites, and a lot of metabolites are very specific to a drug. So if we find a certain metabolite, we can say, initially at some point this drug was also there, but in urine it's a delayed sample. So it's very helpful in sexual assaults if they have been roofied or whatever. If we find it there, we can still say that within a certain time point they were given that drug. So I'm going to hand it over to William, and he's going to talk a little bit about firearms. Yeah.
Alright, I'm going to pick this up because I feel like I'm in a rock band. This is great. So as Asia mentioned, we're broken up in different labs across the state. Like I said, we've got 3 firearms, 1 at headquarters, 1 down in Savannah, and 1 in Columbus. So like she asked earlier about y'all's kind of exposure with forensic science in general. Show of hands, how many people are familiar with firearms, have shot a gun before, anything like that? Okay, it's not bad. I'm going to briefly go over how a gun works. I'm talking like really briefly. I'm only going to talk about one gun, semi-automatic pistol. I'm not going to touch on revolvers, rifles. If you got any questions for those, please bring them up. It's just due to time, I'm going to try to keep it focused. So all modern ammunition consists of a cartridge, usually encased by a metallic body. So this right here would be called the cartridge case. The entire unit, like you would buy at the store, buy a box of ammunition, that's going to be it right there. It's what we refer to as a cartridge. TV, movies, you know, it's probably many different things, bullets, rounds, whatever. So inside the cartridge, or so the cartridge itself, there's four main components. You got the bullet, the cartridge case, so the body, which contains all the gunpowder. And then the fourth component, being at the bottom, and the center fire cartridge is the primer. So regardless of what type of gun it is, the firing pin is going to strike the primer. This is going to create an instant flash or spark, and that's going to ignite all the powder that's inside the case. Also, kind of contrary to maybe this diagram, especially with rifle cartridges, there's going to be some empty space in there. That's obviously needed for combustion. So if there's no air, it's not going to ignite. As that ignites, it separates, the bullet's going to travel down the barrel. And in the case of this gun, a pistol, the cartridge case, I tried to do my best animation, yeah. The cartridge case is going to be ejected out the ejection port. Kind of hard to see on this gun. Ejection port's going to be on the right. Most pistols will eject to the right and rear, or right and forward. Obviously, if the ejection port's on the other side, it's going to go left. The barrel is rifled. That's where you get the name rifle from. But pistols, some shotguns are rifled, but generally they're smooth bore by design. So as the bullet travels down the barrel, all that expansion of the gases, even though it's a metal jacketed bullet, it's going to expand and actually gain a little bit of diameter as it fills the bore. And that's really important for what we do, because as it does that, it is going to be impressed by these grooves that are called plans. These are the raised portions inside the rifling. So, like I think it was the James Bond intro, it's always looking down the barrel. I didn't know what that was until I got older. I just thought it was some weird spiral thing. So I took this actually with my phone through the ocular and the microscope, because I was going to have to transfer it to like 4 different imaging programs, and it kind of worked. This is the land impression, so it's a negative impression. Raised portion in the barrel, it's going to be the depressed area on the bullet. All right, so some of the stuff I just talked about, the lands and grooves, that's going to be one of the first things we look at, specifically when we're looking at bullets. We're going to look at the class characteristics. So any class characteristic are going to be features that are predetermined and designed by the manufacturer. So the diameter of the bullet itself, the caliber, and the number of lands and grooves, and also the direction. So some will twist to the right, some will twist to the left. And obviously that's going to be the first thing you want to look at to eliminate a particular gun from that ammunition. So once we've done all of our class comparisons, we move on to individual characteristics. And this is really, I guess you say, the bread and butter of our science. It's all based on the manufacturing process of the firearm itself. So when firearms are made, it's metal on metal contact. You've got continual and constant wear of the tools on whatever surface that's being manufactured. And this is important because those tools will change over time. And by over time, I mean instantly. So as a metal blade is honing or going down another piece of metal, part of that blade is breaking off. There's metal chips that get stuck under the blade. And what they do is create these lines, these striations, and we refer to them as random imperfections, you know, through the manufacturing process. Doesn't mean there's anything inherently wrong with the product. The most expensive guns and the cheapest ones you can find are going to have these features, these microscopic features, and you can go down the assembly line and take two barrels that were consecutively made. They're going to look different microscopically, and if that was not the case, then you know I wouldn't be here right now, because what's the point? Other than, you know, eliminating off-class characteristics. But that's why we have the comparison microscope, and the bulk of our training is going to be focused under the microscope. Thousands of hours in training. Our base training program is about a year, 13 months, and then we got some off-site training that we did. I went out to New England, toured a bunch of manufacturing facilities up there, took a bunch of armorers courses to really get some extra background on there. So the microscope I mentioned, this guy right here, is a Leica comparison microscope. It's about $70,000. It allows me to look at two different objects side by side and adjust the light independently. So it's really not any different than the microscope that a lot of you guys have used, but the difference is it's joined by this optical bridge that allows you to look at things simultaneously. And of course, you know, modern technology, we've got software, specific software that pairs with the microscope that allows us to do some of our imaging. So right here, I pulled this from a case and just cropped off some of the info. This is, I don't know if you can kind of, there's a little bit of different color because of the lighting I was using, but that's a bullet on the left and a bullet on the right at stage of the microscope. So two different bullets. This is the cartridge case head. So I was talking about earlier, when the firing pin strikes the primer and ignites that, it will indent the primer. And just like it is in the barrel, any manufacturing processes on the firing pin, any of those random imperfections are going to be transferred onto the firing pin of the cartridge case. So the same process applies when we're looking at bullets and cartridge cases. It's just with the bullets, you've got, you know, the sliding motion, so you're going to get, you know, pretty much striations similar to these. This is going to be compression up against the breech face in the chamber of the firearm. So it's a different action, but you're going to get the same result as far as those random microscopic imperfections. So everything that I kind of talked about on examination-wise is what you classify as firearms identification. So Firearms ID is actually a subset of, as a whole, is what we do. However, it encompasses the bulk of what we do. So comparing bullets and cartridge cases, determining if they were fired in a particular gun or what type of gun they were fired in is the bulk of what we do. We do a number of services. We do abuse tests on firearms, so occasionally, you know, there'll be a crime scene incident will occur, and it becomes in question whether the firearm accidentally went off. I'm sure that's been on a couple episodes of CSI. I would imagine, I don't know, but it's a common claim that some people will make. Usually, no, the gun did not just go off. It doesn't really happen. However, safety's parts can fail. Usually, it's a result of the owner of the gun messing with it, trying to do their own work on it, and something breaks and it's not put back together properly. So that can occur. One of the other things we do, took a picture of Zach yesterday. This is muzzle to target distance determination. We don't do it as often as Firearms ID, but when we do it, it can be crucial in the case because given some circumstances that need to be present as far as evidence preservation, we can determine how far a shooter was from the target. So how far the end of the muzzle was from the victim or whatever they shot. Now there's a limit on this because of gravity. If physics and stuff like that. So this has not been chemically enhanced at all. This is just from a distance similar to that shooting a gun. You're going to get deposits of burnt and unburned gunpowder, as well as vaporous lead. So just like any combustion reaction, it's not 100% efficient. So you're going to have stuff that's still burning, didn't burn at all, going to be going out the barrel. And it's really a matter of having a pattern available, being able to look at it, and then we have to reproduce it. So we'll start at a given distance, work our way back, and kind of bracket it. Obviously, not everybody wears white, so when you got other colors involved, you're not going to see any of this. So we do chemical enhancement. The modified Grice test, it enhances the nitrites, which are the burnt gunpowder particles, and it'll turn a bright orange color. After that, we can enhance it with sodium rhodizonate, which will react with lead. So even if it's a fully copper jacketed bullet, there's no exposed lead, lead will be coming out of the barrel. Lead is actually in the priming compound. So in addition to what comes off the bullet, lead-wise, there's also going to be lead in there from the primer. And that's going to show up and again give us a pattern. So 2.5, 3 feet is kind of the maximum on this. And to do this examination, we have to have the specific gun that was used. You can't just go use that same make and model. It's so sensitive that the same gun that was used and the same ammunition that was used, we really need to have it for the test. All right, and since I can't take you guys to work with me, I would, but I don't know if you want to go. It's pretty far. I've been up since 4 this morning, so bear with me. So I put together a virtual tour of sorts. So when we're doing firearms identification, to do that comparison, we have to make test fires. So we'll get a gun in, and we have a entire, pretty much room, wall to wall of ammunition. As many different manufacturers, styles, calibers that we can find, we will keep, and we will match it to what we receive in evidence, make test fires. Again, because just like anything else in science, you want to recreate, everything that you can. So, and inside the same room to the left is this guy. This is a 700-gallon, 750-gallon water tank with a hydraulic lid. So we actually shoot through this port right here into the water, and that's how we collect our bullets, at least from pistols. With rifles, we have to use this over here, which is actually filled with cotton, if you can believe that. And that will stop extremely high-powered rifle bullets. It's kind of a snowball effect. As the bullet enters the box, it's going to start building up that cotton around it and slow it down. At least that's how it's supposed to work. Sometimes it takes an hour or two to find it, but so we've got basically a vacuum hose over here. We'll shoot in here, take the hose out, suck out the bullets, and we can pull them out. And I want to say this is probably 6 feet long or so. Most bullets, 4 or 5 feet, they're going to trail off and just drop shit to the bottom. So any movies out there where you've got people shooting from a distance to somebody trying to swim underwater, it doesn't really work like that. I wouldn't want to be floating on the surface and getting shot at, but if you're a couple feet under, it's not going to be a factor. It's just the way it works. We have a pretty decent sized reference collection. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but we've got hundreds of pistols and rifles. Some really interesting ones that we probably came into possession of in the 40s and the 30s. Don't even really know the origin, but this is it's a Browning BAR automatic rifle. World War I, World War II weapon. I think that one was late 30s production. So we got a short range right on the other side of my office where we can do the muzzle target stuff that I was talking about and collect the rifle bullets and then use the tank ideally for everything else. All right, we're going to open it up for questions. If you guys got any firearms related questions now, I'll take anything you got. Laser point of view. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's very real. We don't do it because.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, he asked about the ballistics gel that you've seen on some shows that they use. It's a tissue stimulant. They make, there's like an FBI protocol for it. And the FBI is very specific about their selection of ammunition. So everything that their agents carry has to pass, all these standards, and they actually use that. I think they make a 10 and 20% density. We don't do it because just for our needs and the services we do. So we're a nationally and internationally accredited lab. So because of that, everything that I do, everything that she does has to fall under those standards. So a lot of different things you can do in firearms examination will kind of cross over into shooting reconstruction. That stuff, it's really not going to fall under anything that would fit in accreditation generally. So independent examiners, a lot of times will be kind of responsible for doing that stuff. And a lot of times they will do the ballistics gel stuff on that.
Don't allow the ammunition, I don't know a lot, but some ammunition, doesn't it deform or break up into a pattern and stuff like that where you don't get really nice rifles?
I'd be like lost without questions because I tried to make this compact and kind of put it together when I was working on a bunch of cases. So the bullets I showed earlier, so that is an expanded hollow point bullet. I would love to get that in the case because everything that I'm going to be looking at microscopically is going to be on what's referred to as the bearing surface. So the long cylinder portion of it, where the bullet tapers off into the nose, it's obviously not going to be engaging the rifling. So there's not, that's not really of use to me. However, he mentioned fragmenting and what different bullets will look like. We'll get pieces that weigh 2 or 3 grains. We can get a full bullet. When these jackets, it depends on what it's impacting. So if it goes through a car door, into a wall, it can be ripped into a couple different pieces. It really all depends and it varies, and that really makes it difficult. We still get the same thing done, it just takes a lot more time to shoot. Yes, sir.
So I know that what you were doing is comparing 2 bullets shot presumably from the same weapon. But if you just have the one bullet, can you narrow it down as the manufacturer or make a model of the weapon?
Yes. I left this specifically out because I was like, I hope somebody asks. Because, we're trying to, we want to make this a whole dissertation. Everybody leave. So if I got one bullet, I can look at the class characteristics, I can measure the lands and grooves on it. And we have access to an FBI database. It's a GRC, General Rifling Characteristic Database. And basically what it is kind of a compilation, an encyclopedia of firearms that have been test fired, examined, all the parameters have been measured, and it's entered and stored in this database. And I can search the landing groove width, the caliber, and the direction of twist. I was mentioning earlier the rifling and the number of landing grooves, and that will produce a list of firearms. The way we report it, it's not an all-inclusive list. It's basically an investigative lead. And depending on what it is, I can get a list of 1 gun, one manufacturer, I can get a list of 60 guns, 30 different manufacturers. Because there's some common trends, like a 6 right rifling and 6 left are some of the more common ones. So you see some crossover, and at that point we'll kind of look at, well, what type of gun is this? If it's something from the 20s from Finland, I'm probably not going to put it on the list.
Behind.
I just wanted to ask you about plastic guns. I was reading they're not very suitable, but is that not?
We haven't got into any of that yet. There's just, I think, a lot of confusion out there on the plastic and 3D guns. To shoot an actual metallic cartridge like that, you're going to have metal components in it. So, what they're doing is the plastic portion of it is going to be the receiver, the frame, and the firearm itself. But to my knowledge, I don't know that you could even get one use out of a plastic barrel, at least in most stuff. So, but when it becomes more of a thing, we'll start seeing it, and we'll have to deal with it. Yeah, it's. I think people are kind of dreaming about that stuff. It's not as easy as you think it is, just because of the physics involved, the amount of pressure that's put off. You at least at this time, you gotta have metal.
It's a more general question. So, what cases go to GPI versus not?
All right. So, and that's a good question for both of us. Sorry, I'm like hiding. The way the GBI works, really on the investigative side and in the crime lab, is we assist the whole state, and we've got departments and offices that carry out their own primary investigations, but for the most part, we have local law enforcement call us or request us to help them. So whether it's requesting help for an investigation, to work the crime scene, or to actually work the evidence, we'll get involved and do that. So, especially with what she does, the GCMS machinery, all that equipment, software, even my microscope, it's just a microscope, but, it's, like I said, 70 grand, and you have to be trained to use it. So, it's not practical for most departments to have that equipment, and that's, where we come in and help out with that.
So another thing about that is there are some, like other states, they have bigger cities that have their own crime labs, so they're local law enforcement. Like when it came to here, like if you had an Athens PD, if they were big enough and had enough funding, they could have their own forensic unit or some portions of a forensic unit, and they may be able to work their own evidence that they picked up at the scene. But most cities don't have that funding because, like, for example, like one piece of instrumentation that I work with is touching $1 million, and we're state workers, okay? We don't get that funding. So if we don't get that funding, it's hard to believe that a city would get that funding to get that equipment. So most local law enforcements will just default and give the GBI their evidence to process because the state law enforcement are our customers. I mean, if somebody has something happen to them, they can't just walk in the front door of the GBI and be like, oh, I think I was drugged, like, can you test my blood? No, we can't. But if you call the cops and then you file a report, the cops can send us your blood and then we'll process it. But in most cases, cities just don't have their own crime labs, so they can't fund it. Or the situation can be, same team.
Keep on circling.
There's like a police SUV out there. They're like, hey man, what's up? But also, what he mentioned earlier about us being accredited, that's a really big deal when we go to court. Like when we go to court and lawyers try to just fillet us from the outside and just disintegrate us into pieces on the stand. That accreditation helps us keep our backbone, and it's also expensive to maintain. So that's another thing about some private labs or some maybe local forensic units that just don't have that. So when it comes to evidence, that's why they would choose the GBI. But when it comes to just like maybe agents, like why would a GBI agent work a crime scene as opposed to a local law enforcement?
Yeah, a lot of it really just comes down to resources and manpower, especially for crime scenes. And that's where the chain of custody starts for all the evidence that we look at. So for, a small crime scene, you're talking, could be 5, 10, law enforcement officers, because you got to secure the scene. One officer is going to be strictly just maintaining a log of who enters and exits the scene. You're going to have technicians or investigators packaging the evidence, recording all that. So it doesn't take long for the numbers to really add up on what you need. And, again, it's not practical to have, those specific positions sometimes, or the expensive machinery when, a small town or area may only get, ideally a homicide or 2 a year or less.
Do you ever call and say the FBI and say they have a $10 million piece of equipment that, most states can afford? Do you ever call and get services?
They actually don't, at least on my end, I don't know about yours. As far as equipment goes and technology, we pretty much got everything that the FBI has on the forensic side. Yeah, right. So she said sometimes cases will move from state to federal, and when that happens, it's kind of ideal for us because we've definitely got a backlog too in my department, so we can, let the feds handle that. They definitely have a bigger budget, so that helps. Yes.
Is there any reason why the Athens Community Department, for instance, couldn't team up with PGA in some instances because I use mass spectrophotometers on a daily basis, $100,000 microscopes. So is there some kind of team or agreement where maybe a small city like Athens could team up with PGA or other university to do higher level forensics, or is there a reason that you wouldn't do that?
Really, probably the only barrier, and it's going to be a probably permanent one, is the accreditation issue and also chain of custody issue. So, all the equipment that we, would be leasing out or coming on campus to borrow, that would have to be. Now I know it's obviously maintained to certain standards on campus, not any less strict or more strict than what we have, but it's once you get to that third step that she was talking about earlier in the legal system, they would just have a field day with that, but it would be nice, and some departments do have a lot more equipment. It depends. I know here in Athens, the PD they've got some dedicated forensic folks. They don't have, the real big laboratory stuff because they just don't need it. They can send it to us and we can take care of it. We have the GBI has a regional investigative office here in Athens. I don't know if anybody knows about that. Don't really advertise because they don't work directly with the public mostly, but it's out on 29. There's 15 of those across the state.
Like when we say accreditation, I know that maybe doesn't mean anything to you guys, but at least I think annually we have someone like that's nationally from the body that we have to meet all of their standards, and they come to our lab and they just like fine-tooth comb everything that we do. They will randomly pick cases and they will want to see everything that was ever done. Like, can we trace this back to when it was at the scene? And we have to be able to show that everywhere that this evidence went, every instrument that it touched before it came to our door. So the reason that we wouldn't really be able to use instrumentation outside of the crime lab is because then it would then, like he was saying, become part of the chain. And also, like once evidence comes in, like we don't really like for it to leave, because if we lose it, then that's on us. And that's not a good day for anyone in the GBI.
each time the evidence moves, there's a barcoded location or person. So,
Everything has a barcode.
yeah, absolutely everything has a
Like
barcode.
shelves, boxes, people, doors, like everything's a barcode.
Yeah, so it's, once it enters our door, you know, that's something that we gotta pride ourselves on, is to being able to look back and say on this date and this time, this is exactly where the evidence was at. That's kind of, you know, the way it has to be. That's what we do.
And then like one other side thing is just, especially for the things I do, but also biology and sometimes chemistry and maybe even bullets, is just the biological hazard of it. Like a lot of the blood samples that we get in are clearly labeled, like HIV positive, hepatitis whatever positive, this positive, that positive. Anything a human being can contract, it's positive for. But a lot of them aren't labeled, and so you just have to assume that everything that you're working with is contaminated with that. So that's something we wouldn't want to, you know, if he had a bullet that maybe went through somebody's flesh, like you wouldn't want to take that to someone else and be like, oh, you know, just go ahead and grab some bleach, like clean it up, you'll be fine. Like, I don't know. Yes.
I had a question in regards to if you receive a sample in and you've got a backlog, whether it's ballistics, whether it's toxicology, forensics, and you spoke that there's degradation, especially with biologics, how do you prioritize to look for things based on whether or not the sample might be sitting out there for 6 months before you get to it, but then any evidence you might have degraded at that time beyond being usable in court? So how do you prioritize what comes in?
So it's a good question regarding sample degradation. So if a crime happened today, and let's say that this person's blood was drawn and sent to the lab, but because we have a huge backlog, it doesn't actually reach my desk for 6 months, and then I'm working on it. So, you know, is that sample even still good? Like, should we have prioritized it because it came in sooner? But when it comes to biological material, like what I work with, all of that blood or urine or biological tissue is collected with preservatives, essentially. And so there's been a lot of studies done where it can be maintained quite literally in a police officer's trunk in the heat of Georgia for 6 months time, and it can be green and clotted by the time it gets to us, and it's disgusting and it smells horrible. But the chemicals that we're looking for are still fine. There's also, for a lot of drugs, studies on, like for example, things that may adhere to glass, like because these samples are typically collected in glass or plastic containers. So there's a lot of research been done on the timeline of how much would have degraded over a certain amount of time just based on the glass or plastic storage that's in. So usually, if that has occurred, then we can sort of explain it with that science, but usually not usually. For everything I work with, the preservatives keep it intact because we do have agencies that are not really good about turning in evidence in a timely manner. So even if we could have gotten to it today, they don't turn it in for 3 months. And they did quite literally keep it in the trunk of their patrol car in the Georgia summer heat, and you're just like, gross. But luckily, science keeps it intact. But I don't know how that matters for anything else.
For our stuff, sample integrity-wise, a lot different than hers. So my department is going to be the last one to receive the evidence because we're the most destructive. If I've got to shoot a gun, obviously that heat, the combustion is going to destroy, any biological or trace evidence along that path, or fingerprints. So it's going to go to latent prints, biology, DNA, trace, all that before it comes to me. And then as far as prioritizing otherwise with the backlog and all that, it's really a case-by-case basis. If it is an investigative, necessity, like it's really hinging on either obtaining a search warrant or moving forward judicially, then they'll call our manager and we'll get that going. And then we're so busy at headquarters, really the only other way we prioritize it is by court date. So when there's a physical court date set, whatever county it's at, then we start working on that stuff to make sure that we can get it there before that date.
I do have one follow-up question, just out of a sense of humor. I'm sure your resources are in demand. Any funny stories about different jurisdictions fighting for your services?
I don't know. It's it probably varies a lot. That's all I really can say. Yeah, no, because it's going to be a county by county thing. But we'll say this: we're we got regions that cover all 159 counties. So really, in the more rural parts that would need the service, we're going to be the quickest. But it gets rough sometimes, especially on the investigative side with agents. All officer involved shootings in the state of Georgia are worked by the GBI. It's been set up that way for a few years. So they don't get a lot of sleep some weeks, but they still get everything covered and keep everybody happy.
It's not like funny, but I mean, I have had to be in both Savannah and then, which is, you don't know where Savannah is, and then Blairsville, which is like up in the mountains, on the same day. Like, I've had to be there for court, and then they're both mad at you because like, oh well, we subpoenaed you, and I'm like, well, 13 counties subpoenaed me. Like, you two actually needed me, and so you actually have the court fight it out. But then sometimes they come back to you and they're like, oh, well, they had a murder, so they won, and it's like this weird like morbid humor. Like, mine was just a DUI, so you can go to the murder case, whatever. But it's not really that entertaining. Major advancements? Oh, well, in my field, we definitely got some new equipment. We actually were the first in the whole country to get this new, I say new instrumentation, it's like upgraded instrumentation for working things like blood alcohols, or for people who like to drink nail polish remover and things of that nature. So that was really nice, and we're currently getting some new instrumentation as well that's sort of advanced. So it's nice just getting new instruments because it means better data, and better data is always easier to read and maybe not necessarily easier to explain, but for us it's like, it's better for us. But as far as firearms?
Yeah, I'm probably the opposite. So really, in being able to take photographs of what we do, and that software has probably been one of the bigger advancements. And honestly, I think it's cool in a way that what we do on the firearms identification is essentially the same process that they've been doing for over 100 years now. And that process has been accepted in the courts, getting back to one of the bigger cases, 1907. So over 100 years. So really the advancement in the software and the microscopes and the lenses and all that is really what helps us the most. However, now definitely on the research side, we're getting into 3D imaging, stuff like that. And occasionally people ask, well, our computer's going to take over what you do, and if that's how it is, that's fine. But I'll find something else to do, I guess. But you're still going to need somebody to validate what the computer's doing. So some of that's already out there on our end. Cartridge cases are actually scanned and put into a national database, and basically it can correlate. But again, an examiner is going to have to verify that before they link those cases.
One more thing, an advancement, something that they're kind of starting to think of doing. I know there's a lot of like common drugs that people use, but a problem that we sometimes have are like new synthetic drugs, like crazy kids coming up with new things to do, like trying to trick us. And something that is kind of starting to be done is an interesting study on, like, sounds gross, but waste. So like collecting maybe sorter samples from clubs or festivals or concerts, and then analyzing it, and anything that comes back that isn't already in our database, then we can start to kind of hone in on and because something we've always struggled with is being behind. Like, people have been getting high off this for 6 months and we had no idea, and our reports are going out negative, and they're like, yeah, and we're like, man. But so that's something that's new for us to try to get a one-up on. So, just be aware.
Thank you so much for coming in. I have a few announcements, but first let's give a big round of applause.